detour sign. And, you know, even in the most familiar places, a detour sign a lot of times puts a little anxiety on most people. I've had to direct traffic before around an event or around something going on in the city when I worked down there, and people would be coming along that way, and you're directing them to go this way. You know, they're wanting to go this way or whatever, and you're just telling them, all right, this is the way you got to go. And they get this look of panic on their face. You know, some of them get anxious, some of them get mad. I mean, I've been flipped off, I've been everything in that situation, you know. Because, you know, they'll be determined they're going to go, and I'll step out and say, no, you have to go that way. And they get bent out of shape over that. And the reason for that is not just because, you know, it's not necessarily that they're just police haters or anything like that. It's because you're interrupting what they're comfortable with. They're comfortable with going that one direction. That's what they know. So they're not familiar with where you're sending them, and it brings a great deal of anxiety to them a lot of times. And here's the thing, is sometimes those detours end up revealing things that are new and interesting to us, and sometimes they cause us problems, if you will. But most of the time it depends on how we approach the route as to how we come out of it. You know, I got lost one time in Greer, South Carolina, or not Greer, but Florence, South Carolina. We were coming back from the beach, Myrtle Beach. Y'all been down there enough to know, you know, it's about 7.5, 8 hours to drive down there. Yeah. Well, if you get lost in Florence, it can be 12 hours coming home. Amen. I'm just saying, I know a guy that may have happened to. But it wasn't necessarily a detour, but here's the thing. At first, I was really anxious about it. I could not find my way. I got turned around. I could not find my way back to the interstate. And I kept making turns that I thought were appropriate. This is pre-GPS days, by the way. I kept making turns that I thought was right, that was going to lead me there. Next thing you know, I end up in cotton fields that have Clemson University Agricultural Department signs around them, and I'm in the middle of nowhere. So I started getting pretty anxious, but then as we're driving around, and Christy, of course, is not helping matters, you know, with her input on things. But we drive around, we end up seeing some really cool stuff. So I finally pulled up, and I may have shared this story before, but I pulled up to a gas station. I saw there was a car that was decked out, had these nice big shiny wheels on it and everything, and the windows were tinted pink. And I nudged her, and I said, I'm going to ask that dude for directions. She said, why? And I said, there's no doubt in my mind that guy over there is selling dope, and he's going to know exactly how to get to the interstate. And so I go over, and the guy rolls his window down, you know, almost like a business transaction, I guess. So I said, hey, man, I said, how you get back to the interstate? I said, I'm lost as I can be. And he just kind of looks at me funny, you know. And I said, for real, man, I need to know how to get back to the interstate. And so he told me, and he was spot on. I got right back on the interstate. But I told Christy, I said, this guy's going to know how to get to the interstate. I know he is. Now, I may have been wrong, and I may have been judgmental on the fact that, you know, his car was decked out like that and everything. And I may have been passing judgment on him, and if I was, then God forgive me. But nonetheless, I was right in the fact that he knew how to get back to the interstate, and it got me there. But nonetheless, got to see some pretty cool stuff. So once we got back on the interstate, and I felt more comfortable about where we were going, and that we were out of this whirlwind that I've been driving around for 2.5 hours in, we started reflecting on some of the stuff that we saw around Florence and realized that Florence is a pretty cool place if you get around on the outside of it. So we come out of it, I guess, feeling better than what we were when we were in it. But a lot of times I like to take the time just to travel roads that I'm not really familiar with and I don't know. And I've had a lot of opportunity to do that with Kevin this year since I went to the county. He and I have ridden a lot together and everything, and during the summer, you know, it's our job to ride around and kind of check on people and see what people's needs are in the county and stuff. And I mean, he's had me places that I had no idea. And I've seen the roads before, but I'd never really been on them. And so now I've learned some of that, and I like that. I like to know that I can get there if I need to. But nonetheless, there's times I feel like that I have everything under control. You know, if I have to go another route because I've been on that road before, and then when I get there, I find out maybe it's not as familiar as I thought it was. You know, Kevin took me up to Conorock earlier this summer. That's the second time I've been there, and Lord willing to be the last time I'm ever there, but nonetheless, he took me up there, and I was trying to notice where we were going and all this stuff, and there's no doubt in my mind that I can get to Conorock. But now, as far as to get to a specific place in Conorock, I don't think I could. Just not that familiar with it yet, right? But I've been on roads before. I've taken detours for whatever reason, road conditions or whatever, and I felt pretty comfortable with it because I got on there, and then I got there and realized, hey, I'm not as familiar with this one as I thought I was. And I'm going to compare that somewhat to when my mom was diagnosed with cancer. You know, that was one of those things that it was a shock and it hurt my feelings when I found out about it, but I was okay with it because I felt like we were prepared to deal with this. Because my uncle, which is her only brother, had been diagnosed with the same cancer about 10 years before and gone through that battle, and I felt familiar with it. I felt like, you know, this is grounds that we've been on before. But once we entered that valley, I was totally lost. I was completely lost in that. I had to experience a great deal of defeat and darkness and loss before I was able to find any light at all in anything that was going along, let alone any victory in it. So, and I didn't tell y'all, I should have, sorry, but Judges is where we'll be, Judges chapter 7. Judges chapter 7. I got a scratchy throat for some reason today. My throat's been jacked for about 3 weeks. Drinking water and coffee, trying to get the hot and the cold going. Judges chapter 7. I'm going to start reading verse 8. I'll read a few. Amen. I forgot yet. I was just telling you where I was going. But nonetheless, listen. Hey, Billy's found his place. That's awesome. I'm going to start reading with verse 8 and read through verse 14, then we'll skip down to verse 20. So Judges chapter 7, start reading verse 8. Found your place, Billy?
God is good.
All the time. God is good. Amen. All right. Judges chapter 7, verse 8. So the people took provisions and their trumpets in their hands, and he sent away all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, and retained those 300. Now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. It happened on the same night that the Lord said to him, Arise, go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. Then he went down with Purah, his servant, to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. Now the Midianites and Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley, as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seashore in multitude. And when Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. He said, I have had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it, so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed. Then his companion answered and said, This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. Now jump down to verse 20. Then the three companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers, and they held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing, and they cried, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And every man stood in his place all around the camp, and the whole army ran and cried out and fled. So, I look at this and I'm like, man, did Gideon ever come up with a detour sign in his life, right? He came right up on a detour sign, because they give you a little backstory on this, or catch you up to where we are if you're not familiar. Gideon was he was on the threshing floor threshing wheat, minding his own business, right? He's just doing his thing. Now, Israel had been under the rule of the Midianites for a little while now, and they were needing to be freed from that, obviously, and God was going to send somebody. And we know in the book of Judges, God sent different folks to be judges for a period of time to judge Israel or to bring them through things and to prophesy to them a lot through God. But nonetheless, he's there minding his own business, threshing his wheat. Next thing he knows, the angel of the Lord shows up, right? And is telling him now how it is that he's going to be the one to deliver Israel from the Midianites. He's going to be the one. And, you know, of course, like most people, he's like, I don't think I'm your guy. You know, and that happens a lot in the Bible. If you see people tried to argue with God a little bit about whether they were the right person for the job he was calling them to do. I see that a lot now in today's time. I see it right here in this church. Some of y'all try to tell God that what he's calling you to do, that maybe he's got the wrong person. God don't ever have the wrong person. Just keep that in mind. If he's leaning on you or convicting you or burdening you to do something, you're the right person for that job. But nonetheless, this led him to making his dad mad and everybody else pretty much around him that was worshiping Baal, because even his dad was worshiping Baal and had places set up for worship. And so Gideon went and tore all that down. So as if that wasn't enough, when Gideon started gathering his army, God said, look, you got way too many people. You got way too many people. I cannot send this amount of people in to defeat the Midianites and me receive the glory for it, essentially is what he's saying. He said, they will give themselves praise and glory for what they've done. He said, you got too many people. So he started out with several thousand people in his army, right? And God reduced his army down to 300. So, and this is a familiar story, and a lot of us have heard about the 300, not the movie The 300 is completely not the right place, but nonetheless, many of us have heard about Gideon and the 300. So at this point, Gideon had to likely think that maybe he was misunderstanding exactly what God wanted, right? I mean, there's times that things come about and we feel like maybe God's leading us into something, but we look at it and we can't really understand exactly what it is that God's wanting us to do when we get there. And what has to happen at that point is we have to open up those lines of communication between us and God. And that's exactly what Gideon did. But nonetheless, I can go back to my mom being sick, and I can remember everything seemed to be crumbling around me when my mom was sick. I mean, it seemed like everything was falling apart. She had been there for me pretty much my whole life. I mean, she was a single mom. I'm an only child. You know, she was everything to me at one point in my life. God, of course, brought me a beautiful wife and a family, but Mom had been everything to me, and she had always been there for me, and now she just couldn't. Physically, she couldn't. She would if she could, but she was just physically limited and was not able to be there. So it's time for me to be there for her. And when I thought I was ready for this valley, I figured out quickly that I certainly was not ready for this valley. Just because my uncle had been through this and we had seen it, and we as a family had been there with him along this road, didn't mean that this was the same road that we were on again. And I tried to deal with all this on my own. I never really put it in God's hands. I wasn't necessarily in the right place in my life at the time. I didn't have that relationship with Christ. I wasn't trusting Jesus Christ with all the things that come about in my life. So I'm trying to deal with this the way that I saw was the best way to do it. And the next thing I knew, everything in my life was turning upside down because I was turning to all the wrong places for help. I was turning to the wrong people. I was turning to the wrong coping mechanisms. I was doing all the things wrong rather than turning to God, the one who eventually ended up getting me through all this anyway. I had to go through this valley, guys, and at certain points I never saw any opportunity to come out of this valley in good shape. So not only was I going through the valley with my mom, but now I created other valleys that I had to go through. So, you know, when a lot of times when we have a valley that we're going through, if we're not turning to God for that help, that valley that's in front of us all of a sudden will have a fork. And it's going to fork off because we're going to create other valleys here. And then we'll create other valleys here. And so many people get caught up in the valleys of life and the valleys of depression, the valleys of addiction, the valleys of hurt, the valleys of pain. They just keep letting one lead to another because they fail to cry out to God. They fail to let God be the one that leads them through there, right? The more I looked at my adversaries that were in these valleys, the deeper my problems became, man. I just kept looking. I'm like, gosh almighty. I mean, all of a sudden I went from a valley with my mom going through a cancer battle to a valley with my marriage being on the rocks, with a valley to my ways swinging back to my drinking days and things like that, and just everything falling apart. A valley of my relationship with my kids crumbling. The valley of my relationship with people I was close to crumbling because I was turning my back on them because I was going through so much. I was going to these where the enemy was leading me because the enemy was saying, oh, I got this group over here. They understand what you've been through. They're going to help you through it. And that's what I fell into. I was not prepared to go into that valley. Gideon was standing, here's the thing. Gideon, we find in here, was standing on a high place looking down at the valley that awaited him. It says, some of the people took provisions and went and saw, let me skip down. He sent away all the rest of Israel and man to his tent, retained 300 men. Now the camp of Midian was below him in a valley. So he's on this high place and he's looking down. He sees the valley that he has to go down to. I think a lot of times we'll see the valleys coming up on us. We see things happening, right? I wonder how many times we've stood and overlooked those valleys that we know are coming up on us, those valleys that are out before us, and just shuddered with fear. I wonder how many times we've been there. Because a lot of times we can see it. A lot of times a marriage on the rocks is not all of a sudden a marriage on the rocks. A marriage on the rocks sometimes is a long road that's been traveled. And you might be at a high point on things in life and be able to look down though in that valley and see that there's a lot of trouble down in that valley that's coming in that marriage. Or you might go to not feeling well for a long time and put it off and put it off. And then you go to the doctor and you realize that there's a diagnosis and you got to look down into that valley that you're fixing to have to fight. Or you may be addicted to drugs and alcohol and fight that for the longest time and then realize that there's something down in that valley that you're going to have to go fight. You're already in a valley, but you think, well, okay, I found a little daylight, I'm coming out of it. But then you look down and there's that valley in front of you and it's vast and there's something and you're scared. You shudder with fear. Of course, you know, we try to play it off when that happens in our lives, especially with Christians, man. We got to say all the right Christian things, right? To convince ourselves and others that we're prepared for that valley. Right? We got to get it right. Oh, brother, it's all good, right? Because I'm good, you know, because yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Okay. And then, you know, and then you this one seems to be a favorite one with the women. Oh, girl, it's okay because there ain't no weapon formed against me that will prosper. Yeah, it sounds good, but do you believe it? Have you prepared yourself to actually believe that? That's the whole thing. A lot of people say these things. You know, those are all the things that we like to say, and they are all things that God gave us in His Word, so we're going in the right direction, right? But are we really holding on to them? Are we really believing those things that we're saying, or are we just saying it because that's what we know the Christian thing to say is? If that's the reason you're saying it, it's not going to get you through. You can't expect to be able to find victory in a valley that you haven't prepared yourself for. That's the whole thing. And through God, we can prepare ourselves for any valley that we come across. We can be completely prepared to face anything that comes our way, as long as we know that we're preparing with God. Gideon was trusting God through everything. Everything that was happening to him, he was trusting Him. Look at verses 9 and 10. It happened on the same night that the Lord said to him, "Arise, go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant." All right, I want to take a look at a couple of things here that I really like. First, God tells Gideon to go down the valley because he would deliver the enemy into Gideon's hand. If we don't have that open lines of communication with God, if we're not praying to God, if we're not listening for God, if we're not studying God's Word, we're not going to hear any of that. We're not going to be prepared to go in and to hear how it is that God is going to bring us a victory in this valley that's down there ahead of us. That just ain't going to happen. Here's my favorite part of the whole passage, though. God said, if you're afraid to go down there alone, take your servant. You think, well, he's taking a servant. Listen, servants were very trusted back then. Servants were very close. Servants oftentimes lived right beside, in the same household and slept in the next room from people. This was obviously a trusted person, or God wouldn't have told him to take him, right? So what can we take from these verses? First of all, if we're staying in touch with God in our daily lives, we're going to be prepared for our valleys, right? We're going to be prepared for our valleys. How we stay in touch with God in our daily lives? Through prayer, through study, through meditation. I've told you all this 1,000 times, and I'll keep saying it because I think it's important for us to understand that we have to be diligent in prayer, in study, and meditation. We have to be. And a lot of people get confused on that word meditation when they hear it in a church setting or in a Christian setting. I'm not talking about folding your legs and putting your knees out and doing all the home. I'm not talking about all that. It's as simple as just being quiet. In that time of study, in that time of prayer, you need to reach a point where you can just be quiet and focus everything on God. Focus everything on God. That's the point in your life where you need to be in that closet. You need to be where it is that you can be as quiet as you can and try to clear your head and your heart of every thought and just focus on God and listen, because He comes oftentimes in that small, still voice. We're always looking for the earthquake, but it's not always an earthquake. If you're calling out to Jesus every day, it will be natural to do the same when you enter a valley. Because what happens if you're not, is you get into that valley, and the next thing you know, you're calling out to somebody or the wrong thing. You're not calling out to Jesus. So if you're doing it every day and you get into that valley, the natural response is to call out to Jesus. Good news is we see a lot of valleys coming. Bad news is we don't sometimes. Sometimes we just get thrown into it. But nonetheless, if you are prayed up and you've made it a practice in your life to listen to God and to cry out to Jesus, then you're prepared when that valley comes about, whether you see it coming or not. Gideon was in such great communication with God that he was able to listen to God, go down to the enemy camp, and then hear God's plan for victory. See, we cry out a lot of times, but we don't listen. So when we get in that valley and we start crying out, it's okay to cry out and be loud about it. It's okay to cry out and be tearful about it. It's okay to hit your face and to cry out, but then there's a point where we need to listen, because God's got a plan for victory, but you got to listen to hear it. Sometimes we talk too much and don't listen enough. Why do you think that God gave us one mouth and two ears? So that we can listen twice as much as we talk. But we fail in that. We fail in that, even in our time with Him. The other thing is this: God don't expect us to go through valleys without support. That's the thing. I love verse 10. I love it. When we think that we're strong and independent, right? Because we think we're strong and independent. But God places people in our lives to go through valleys with us. God places those people in our lives for a reason. So when the valleys come up, we've got somebody to go through that valley with us. But here's the thing. You got to make sure that you know who you're going through that valley with, right? Or who you're bringing into your valley. I don't want to bring somebody into my valley that's not a prayerful person, that don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, because they're not going to know how to get through that valley. Even if I know how to get through the valley, they're going to be pulling me in another direction, even if they don't mean to. They got the best of intentions. But if they pull you in any direction other than that direction that Jesus is sending you, it's the wrong direction. But God puts people in your life. That's why it's important to have somebody in your life to pray with, to study with, to be vulnerable with. To be able to say things, to feel comfortable talking to that person about things that bother you because you know they're going to pray for you. You know that they've got scriptural knowledge that they can refer you to. And you can be completely vulnerable with that person. I'm blessed, man. I got more than one. I got more than one. It's a blessing to have that. But you need to find an accountability partner that you can spend time with, you know, once a week or twice a week or whatever it is, whenever you got time to get together with them. Sometimes an accountability partner can just simply be somebody that you can pick up the phone and call and say, I need prayer. I've been tempted and I'm struggling, man. That's a good thing to have. That's a good thing to have. And you don't have to just have one. I know accountability groups that meet. 3, 4 dudes that get together and talk about stuff. 3, 4 ladies that get together and deal with stuff together and pray and have this time with God. People that you know love you enough to hold you accountable even if they're going to tick you off. And somebody come at me and say, listen, man, you're not being very preacher-like. I ain't going to say any names, but I can look in the direction somebody's told me that before. Okay? And I appreciate him for it. You know why? Because he wasn't saying it to judge me. He was saying it because he cares about me and he cares about this ministry that God's given me, right? But that's cool. Now, as a preacher, just because I stand up here in the pulpit don't mean I'm the one that's got all the answers all the time. I lean on y'all just as much as y'all lean on me, probably more. But nonetheless, you need that. Sometimes we grow weary in that walk and we need somebody to help point us back to the Lord. That don't make us a lesser Christian, man. That makes us a human being, a carnal person, right? God knows exactly what we need and when we need it. And that's exactly what we see right there in that passage. God knew that Gideon had some fear about going down into the valley, so he told him to take someone he trusted with him. Guys, you're going to stand and look into valleys in your life. You're going to have peaks and valleys. You're going to. God tells us it's going to happen. There's going to be times that you're able to stand and you're able to look down into that valley, and it's okay to be afraid. But I just want to encourage you to keep those communications open with Jesus so you know when you get there that you got direction. I also want to encourage you to have good fellowship with people that you can trust, that you can lean on. People you know will pray for you. People you know will pray with you. People you can be vulnerable to, that you can tell what you're afraid of, and they don't make fun of that or look at you as a lesser person. They want to help be that strength for you. Gideon had that. God recognized that Gideon had fear in this. He's fixing to send him down into a valley with thousands of Midianites and Amalekites that are completely against them. They want to kill them, right? So he's like, go down there, I'm going to show you the way. But if you're afraid, take your boy with you. That's important, guys. Together, the two of them went down into that valley, right? And they heard God's plan. They heard God's plan on how it was that through his leading that they were going to be victorious in the valley. Sometimes, guys, we don't hear God's plan so clear. But if we have that person that we trust, that person that we've prayed with, that's prayed for us, that person that we've had time to talk to and time to meditate with and that we've had fellowship in, that we know trusts the Lord just as much as we do, that we know gets in their word and has it hid away in their heart. Sometimes they'll hear it for us and they'll help us through that valley. Guys, valleys are going to come. They're guaranteed. I could ask for a show of hands here, and I know every hand in here would go up with valleys that we've gone through. Even when we're at that highest point, we have to realize that at the highest point, there's always a valley below it. But it's all good. You've got to prepare yourself for it. It's not always going to be easy. I don't care how prepared you are for it. That's why God tells us to turn to him. He tells us to turn to him. But I'm telling you now, God told Gideon to take that man with him for a reason. I've preached I don't know how many messages out of this. I've never caught that before. I've never caught it before. Not that I'm some great theologian or something, but I caught that today. I was like, man, God really put some people in my life, all right, that are that to me, that I can go into these valleys with. And you know what? After I went through so much in that valley at the time that my mom was fighting cancer, and at the time that I put all this unnecessary stuff in my life and went into valleys that I didn't even have to go into, once I got a hold of God through all that, or God got a hold of me, once all that happened, man, I was able to see things in a whole new light. And he pulled me out of it. Here's what's interesting about that. All of that, and I've shared my testimony with y'all before, some of you anyway, about my calling to preach, right? And it's kind of an interesting thing that happened through all that. But that had been going on for years. I just didn't realize it. You know why? Because I wasn't having any sort of relationship. But through all of that, sometimes we got to go through some things, realize what it is that God's got for us. And through all of that, I come out and God opened up my eyes and my heart to see what his calling was for me. So my encouragement to you is this. It's not about me, it's about him, okay? But my encouragement to you is this. Know that you're prepared to go through the valleys. Know that little things sometimes get big victories, because there was a little army that went in there and got a big victory, right? Know that you're not alone in this, because you've got God, and if you will listen and see the people around you that God places in your life strategically for these things, you're not going to go through any valley alone. You're going to have people who pray with you, who support you through all this, no matter what it is. And there's times that we go through things and people, we feel like everybody turns their back on us. I've heard people go through divorces and you know, they feel like the people turn their back on them and all that stuff. But there's those people. If we had that accountability with one another, and that time to pray with one another, that time to pray for one another, that time to share scripture with one another, that fellowship, there's those people that will go through those valleys with you, no matter what that valley looks like. Bow your head and close your eyes. So today my encouragement